Okay, so now for a discussion of some of the themes of Call Me By Your Name. One of the central themes that I found pretty interesting in this movie was this idea of the struggle to establish a unified, authentic identity. So in my review, I complained that there weren't enough obvious conflicts or challenges for Alio. But I think this attempt to discover or create one's identity is his primary challenge. But it is a complex internal struggle, and the film depicted it in a complex, subtle way. So this is great when it comes to appreciating the subtext of the movie, but it doesn't solve my earlier problems with the main surface level story because it is such a subtextual, subtle element. Call Me By Your Name has a lot of internal conflict. Characters who are somehow split or divided internally. Alio explains that culturally he is American, Jewish, and Italian. Oliver relates to having lived as a minority Jew in an American town, and now he's also in northern Italy. So there's a lot of different cultural, national elements combined in each of these characters. Like the derivation of the word apricot, is it Latin, is it Greek? Identity is not simple throughout Call Me By Your Name. The film itself also represents this split cultural personality. It stars American actors, is directed by an Italian, is set in northern Italy, and the dialogue spans English, French, Italian, and German. Call Me By Your Name also considers not just the idea of division within oneself and the struggle to achieve this unified, authentic identity, but also complicates the idea of divisions between different people. The scene to which the title refers, in which Oliver and Alio call each other by the other's name, explores this idea of divisions between people and whether they can be blurred or jumped over or swapped around. So this exercise allows them to play at swapping identities, and in doing so, blurring that line that separates one another. This is an act of intimacy, but also touches on this kind of philosophical question of the unified self. We have different conflicting elements within us, and in this way we are not simply one person. But this scene also raises the idea that a person might also be defined by others. Am I my own actions, or am I my lover's image of me? Am I my father's beliefs and influences? Call Me By Your Name plays with these ideas by blurring the lines between parts of the self and between the self and other. Alio's father, in a powerful admission to his son, reveals his own internal conflicts. He explains how he's had to deal with the opposing forces within him, gay versus straight, young versus old, single versus married, throughout his life. He also espouses the importance of holding on to past joys and their associated pains in order to maintain one's perspective. This philosophy, that happiness requires embracing opposites, is a really interesting idea that perhaps allows us to better understand the movie's other characters too. Alio, Oliver, and even Alio's girlfriend Marzia can be read in these terms. Their character arcs progress from joy to pain to finding a happiness in embracing both. Marzia was badly hurt by Alio, but she loves him and she moves on with her life. Alio's father remembers the joys of youth, but moves on in the understanding that they've passed. Oliver is gay, but engaged to marry. Alio's father's speech towards the end reminded me of a very similar scene in an old Japanese movie by Yasujiro Ozu called Late Spring. There's a moment towards the end of that movie where the protagonist, Noriko, is soon to be wed after much hesitation. Her father, Shukichi, explains that marriage is not simple, and love in marriage might not come easily, but through accepting that challenge and that conflict, and working at it, a happy marriage can be achieved. It is a similarly generous and sad moment in which the father seems to represent lost youth, but in giving up his past, hands hope and love over to the child. Another theme or element that's prominent in Call Me By Your Name is the environment or nature. Alio's environment is beautiful, clear, and unoppressive. His house is always seemingly open, and as we've said about the plot, there are no barriers in the environment either. Alio is free to wander down to the lake with Marzia or to the township with Oliver. When Oliver asks Alio what there is to do here during the summer, he jokes, "I only wait for the summer to end." Other images of the freedom of this environment abound in Call Me By Your Name. Our main characters are rarely constrained by clothes, usually having just shorts or perhaps an open shirt. The house too, as we've mentioned, is unlocked with doors and windows open. Elio goes in and out freely. There are also very few boundaries between parents and son. No topic is seemingly out of bounds. Elio may leave mid-meal at any time to go, say, skinny dipping. Call Me By Your Name is not very interested in the issue of gay lovers in society. It is more interested in gay men in space, in nature. Elio is free to find himself in the water, on the dirt roads, in the mountains, and finally looking into that fluttering fire. This is a man in nature trying to find his natural self. This is not a movie about a man in political structures or in society. As I've said, there are not many traditional plot barriers for Elio to overcome in this movie. No competing lover to get past, no oppressive parents or social forces. The barriers are internal, subtle, and sometimes depicted visually. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the imagery or symbolism in Call Me By Your Name. Some of the imagery and symbolism throughout also suggests these ideas of division or barriers between people. Elio is often positioned as quiet spectator, separate from others. When he first sees Oliver, it is from behind or within the frame of his bedroom window, up on a different level of the house. At other times, he watches the world and Oliver through the frames of his sunglasses. These images seem to function to separate him from others, and also perhaps suggest that he's viewing them as if through or on a screen or canvas. This idea of people being divided by walls or barriers appears in other ways too. On their trip to the beach to dredge up that sculpture, the line between the front and the back seats in the car becomes a point of tension between Oliver, Elio, and his father. When they arrive, the space and bricks separating Elio and Oliver as they're walking along continues this representation of them as separated by some lines in space. Appropriately, these scenes are all before they've come together and swapped names and connected in that romantic way. After that happens, there are fewer of these images of obstructive lines separating them. Rather, after that, they're often shown within one frame, like within the window frame of the bedroom, and within one space in, say, one room on one level. In Call Me By Your Name, the theme of identity, determining what Elio is and wants, seems to be linked to some quest to figure out where his boundaries or his limits lie, where he ends and others begin, how he might be put into a box, a category, in terms of sexuality, nationality, cultural type, etc. This is perhaps manifested in testing his boundaries in space. We've talked about how the environment he's in is characterized by its openness. It's almost like a vacuum in which he can move freely. So that's the perfect kind of space in which to test and set one's limits of the self. This pushing of boundaries in space plays out in a few ways. The first is the kind of image, the symbol of the bedroom. Elio's bedroom, which has a wall and a door, often open, neighbours Oliver's bedroom. And these two rooms share a bathroom, which is on the dividing line. It's also interesting to note that Oliver's current room used to be Elio's, so they've swapped. So this kind of tells us that the lines between Elio and Oliver and the lines between Elio and the outside world aren't reliable. They're liable to blur or shift or even kind of allow people to jump over and swap sides. So identity and space are kind of challenged throughout the movie. In the same way, his name is unstable. Identity is often simply represented by one's name. I'm Robin. Elio and Oliver play at swapping names. Again, this is kind of blurring that boundary of people's identities. The third way I think pushing of boundaries plays out throughout the movie is the fact that identity boundaries are challenged physically. So I mentioned Julia Kristeva's abject theory. Now in that theory, bleeding is kind of horrifying because it threatens the boundary between self and other, or the boundary between inner and outer. So it's not just a threat to the physical self, but it's a threat to the kind of stability of one's identity, because it's the self spilling out into other space and breaking down those boundaries that hold us together, not just physically, but kind of psychologically. If Elio is trying to determine his self, his place, and his limits of his identity, and how it connects and is distinct from others, a nosebleed may represent penetration of that boundary of himself. Inner is in a nosebleed spilling out, and the border that keeps him as one stable identity is symbolically under threat. Another image of abjection in the movie is the damaged peach, broken, oozy, messy. It is food, it is object, but it is here not used as such. Its role, its identity is blurred as its physical boundaries break down. So Oliver then, in a later scene, holding it aloft and threatening to eat it, upsets Elio more than anything else in the movie does, really. Perhaps because, well, firstly, it is Oliver drawing attention to Elio's transgression, but also because he's threatening to kind of redefine the object again, turning it back into food when Elio has already ruined that categorization by breaking through its semantic and physical boundaries. As we've said, societal boundaries too, walls, doors, windows, parental rules or pressures, are shown to be very lax throughout the movie. However, the boundary holding Elio together, that is, as I say, his skin, is very important. Breaking into the peach, blood breaking out of his body, etc., are major moments of borders being broken through. This highlights again the difference between Call Me By Your Name and a lot of other more mainstream movies. This is not a movie concerned with politics, social constraints, or even plot. It is concerned with character, with Elio and the question of his identity and his limits and his boundary, what makes him him. So when I expect some, in my review, when I complain that there was no dramatic event to add impact or stakes, like a death or a marriage or some other barrier, I'm probably mistaking what this film is, so it might be a bit unfair. Like Elio's dad's description of his sculptures, there are no straight lines here, only curves begging you to be seduced. Straight lines are challenged, blurred, or penetrated throughout Call Me By Your Name. This is represented by the breakdown of those lines, so the lines separating inside from outside and room from room, so walls, windows, doors, the lines separating self from other or outer, skin, blood, the lines of clothes separating you from the outside world and environment, and the lines between people, like their names, their bodies, and so on. These are all kind of blurred and challenged and explored throughout the movie.